Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to have Shivika Narang defend her PhD thesis. Some of you might have actually attended her colloquium. This was on February 28, 2023. And would like to extend a special welcome to Professor Neeldhara Mishra from IIT Gandhinagar. She happens to be the PhD examiner, one of the PhD examiners for for Shivika. And Shivika, over the last 4.5 years, this is some extremely interesting work in matching problems. You are going to see that now. And she actually started her career here with an MTech research thesis. And she has the distinction of being the first MTech research student being awarded the degree in IISc. So her thesis was the first MTech research thesis awarded in IISc. And then she continued her PhD. And after post-PhD, she already has an assignment. She is going to the Simon Laufer Mathematical Sciences Institute at UC Berkeley. And then she will do a postdoc, and she will come back to India, hopefully as a faculty member in a good institution in India. So wishing her well. Over to Shivika, and let's go give her a wide applause in advance. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Narhari sir for the kind introduction and also just being a very supportive and understanding advisor over the last 5 years, 7 years actually. So without further ado, today I'll be talking about some of the work I have done since I started my PhD, and that has gone into my thesis titled Algorithms for Achieving Fairness and Efficiency in Matching Problems. So if you know me, you know I believe very wholeheartedly that matching problems exist everywhere in reality. You can use matching models to capture a whole host of real life problems, from ride sharing, assigning office spaces, college admissions, job searches, and much, much more. And because real life is very nuanced, you all often need different types of matching models to capture these things. So there's the most well-studied one is 1-1 matchings. Then there's also many-to-one matchings and many-to-many matchings, which we would not be covering in this talk, but is nonetheless a very interesting model also to study. And you might have gotten a feel that we are looking at sort of these bipartite matchings. So there's agents on one side who have to be matched to people on the other side, right? So colleges have to be matched to students, not students to students and colleges to colleges. So that can be a different type of matching. But so our focus will be these sort of bipartite things, and being game theorists, we will be looking at settings with preferences. So these preferences can be on agents on one side or both sides, right? And so our aim will be that over these bipartite one or two-sided preference models, we want to find fair and efficient matchings. Okay, so fairness and efficiency are desirable properties, but how do you mathematically pin them down? So for efficiency, we can define it in multiple ways. There's Pareto optimality, which social welfare maximization, stability. I will define all of these very shortly, which are all very valid notions of efficiency. Fairness is even harder in terms of there's something called envy-freeness. So how are you fair? It's very hard to say this is fair or that is fair mathematically, right? So one concept could be envy-freeness. So I am not envious of someone else, what someone else has got. I am as happy with mine as I would have been with what someone else has got, right? There's something that is one approach to fairness. Another would be more of a, okay, someone might be happy, but overall the value that they are getting is very low. So you want to make sure that the that the worst of agent is as happy as possible, and then the second worst of agent is as happy as possible. And that is the idea behind Leximan optimality. There's also many other versions of mathematically defining fairness. Maximum share is one, Nash welfare, there's many more. And once we have some way of finding efficient matchings, fair matchings, as game theorists, we also want to make sure that we can give incentives to people who will report their preferences to be honest. So that is called incentive compatibility. So this thesis essentially looks at these different concepts and studies them for different matching models. So over the entire space of matching problems, we will look at these bipartite type matchings where preferences can be one-sided or two-sided. And we will look at many-to-one matchings and one-one matchings. So for the space of one-sided preferences, our notions of efficiency are going to be social welfare and Pareto optimality, but social welfare maximization will imply Pareto optimality. And also for fairness, we will be looking at it from a lens of envy freeness. So envy freeness typically it's hard to exactly satisfy envy freeness. So we will often relax it to to things that tend to be satisfied more. And so for the many-to-one instance, what we will find is that in order to find something that's fair and efficient, you can actually use this concept of Leximan that I was mentioning to be able to do that and tie them together. And this is what we cover in chapter 3 of the thesis. Chapter 4 looks at one-one matchings and then again looks at social welfare and envy freeness. Over there, with two-sided preferences, stability is crucial. There's a lot of work on stable matchings. Stable matchings have been studied for over 60 years now. So stability is a very desirable and almost non-negotiable property in matching. So we keep that as an invariant. And for the third technical chapter or the fifth chapter of the thesis, we look at finding the Leximan optimal over the space of stable matchings. And we also comment on the incentive compatibility of mechanisms that can find such matchings. And finally, in the last technical chapter, we look at fractional one-one matchings. I will define all these terms and focus on mechanisms that return stable matchings and are also incentive compatible. Right? So let me talk about our first technical chapter, which is titled Fair and Efficient Matching of Delivery Tasks to Agents. This work was done as part of a research visit I had done to Penn State last year. And so this is joint work with Dr. Hadi Hosseini and Tomasz was at Penn State. So why do we care about this specifically? Now, I'm sure all of you know you can buy anything off the internet. And if you can buy anything off the internet, people do. And because of that, inside and on our doorsteps, the amount of delivery packages is overflowing. And not just inside our homes, but it's also putting a lot of undue burden on the people who will be delivering these packages. And it's very well covered in news media also that the working conditions for these people are not good, essentially. So it is imperative that we find efficient and fair allocations of these delivery tasks. Okay, so I'm now going to give a simplified example of how why this is an interesting problem and non-trivial to do, right? So consider this graph where there's the delivery hub is at node H, where the delivery agents will start from. And then whatever orders that they have, they will go to the corresponding locations. Each of the other nodes has an order to be delivered there. And their cost will be how far they travel. Now, as you might be able to tell, this is a tree graph. There are no cycles. So whatever edge they will traverse they will end up traversing twice if they want to start from the hub and then return to it at the end of the day, right? So now if I just want to minimize the number of edges that one agent, so both the agents will traverse total, that is easy, right? This would be the min total cost, which is 7 because there are 7 nodes, right? How would you do that? Have one person do the entire thing. That's one option. Have one person go to A and the other person go from B to G. That's another option. But the minute one person goes to A and any of the nodes on the other side, both of them will be traversing this edge, which would increase the total cost from 7 to more, right? Clearly, these allocations are not fair, right? One person's doing much more work than the other person. However, you want to mathematically define fair. So, sorry. So like I said, we would like to, let's say, look at envy freeness. Now, envy freeness here, if you try and figure it out, is not possible. So we look at a relaxation of envy freeness called EF1. So here, we send agent 1 to nodes A, B, and G, and agent 2 does the rest, right? Simple example, here agent 1 gets a cost of 6, and agent 2 gets a cost of 5. But there's a problem with this, right? Now, agent 1 can go to agent 2 and say, hey, you're already going to F, and I am already going to B. How about you service G and I'll service C? It won't increase your cost because going from F to G is the same as B to C for you. And agent 2 says, sure. And we get this allocation. This is called a Pareto dominating allocation for the old one. And here, agent 1 has significantly lesser cost without an increase to agent 2's cost. So this is much more efficient, right? This is Pareto optimal, actually. And the other thing is, if you look at this graph, right, someone has to go to G. One person will have to go to G and incur this cost of 5. So the minimum possible maximum cost incurred in any allocation should be 5. And this is captured by the minimax fairness notion, where we want to minimize the maximum cost incurred in an allocation, right? Now, more formally, we are given a set of agents and a tree graph. Tree because if it's not a tree, it's extremely hard computationally, right? And this graph is rooted at this special node called H, which is the hub. All these agents have to start from the hub with the delivery orders. And then after delivering whatever orders that they have to, they go back to the hub, right? And that cost for servicing a set of nodes will be the number of distinct edges they travel to do this point. Starting from the hub, go to these nodes, and then return to the hub. And so our aim is to partition all the nodes which are not the hub among these n agents fairly and efficiently. For fairness, we will be looking at envy freeness up to 1 order. So one agent might have more cost than the other, so they would envy the other person, but this envy would get mitigated by removing some particular order in their bundle, right? So if I remove this X, the cost of AI becomes less than the cost of AJ. Then MMS is the other thing. So you want to minimize the maximum cost incurred. I just want to point out for people who would be interested in this space, this is a simplified definition of MMS, which is happening because the cost functions of all the agents are equal. If the cost functions are not identical, this will not happen. Okay. Right. For efficiency, we will look at Pareto optimality. So so our allocation will be Pareto optimal if there's no other allocation, which decreases some agent's cost without increasing someone else's. Right. So that is our basic notion of efficiency. And the second thing is social optimality, where we want to minimize the sum of the costs incurred by all the agents, right? Anything that is SO will be PO. Okay, very important here. So what do we do in this chapter? We first resolve the existence of fairness with and without efficiency. And as you can see, EF1 exists alone, MMS exists alone. But the only combination of fairness and efficiency that's guaranteed to exist is MMS and PO. And it's computationally hard to find any of these except for EF1 alone, right? We also give an interesting implication, which is that anything that is EF1 and PO, whenever it exists, must also be MMS. And this is interesting not only because this is something that was not known before, but also it helps us give an exponential time algorithm, which helps us find all of these combinations of fairness and efficiency. Okay, and we'll use this algorithm to do experiments to see, okay, if this combination is not existing, how often in simulations will it exist, for example, and also explore some fairness versus efficiency trade-offs. Okay, so I will quickly go over why these things exist. So EF1 alone exists for monotone valuations. Typically, we look at non-negative values, not costs. So you want more things. And there's a standard NV cycle elimination algorithm. You can tweak it slightly and get the exact same guarantee here for EF1 alone, right? But EF1 and Pareto optimal allocations need not exist. The graph we just went over is a good example of that. These are two EF1 allocations. They have Pareto improvements here. And because anything that is socially optimal must be Pareto optimal, EF1 and SO allocations also need not exist. Again, same graph, right? So now the other notion we have in mind is MMS. And remember I had mentioned Leximin. Leximin here what it will try to do is, let's look at the set of all possible allocations, all possible ways we can match agents to these delivery tasks. We narrow this set to the set that minimizes the maximum cost of any of the agents. In this new set, now we want to further narrow it down to those that minimize the second highest cost and then the third highest and so on. And so so whatever the final set you will get, all those matchings would be Leximin optimal. And these will all be Pareto optimal. And because this is this like optimization based notion, some Pareto optimal matching has to exist, right? And because our cost functions are identical, this Leximin optimality will imply that it's MMS. And PO you already got for free from Leximin. So MMS and PO allocations must exist in our setting, right? MMS, that's why MMS alone also must exist. MMS and social optimality need not exist. Again, same example, okay? So the next important thing we do is give a characterization for when EF1 and PO exists. I will not go into the proof, but I'll give you the highlights of the ideas. What we first prove is that if I give you an EF1 allocation, where the differences in the cost of two agents is more than one, then it cannot be Pareto optimal. So you get a bunch of cases, and in each case, you will get a Pareto dominating allocation. The proof is interesting, but I'm not going over it right now. Based from this lemma, what I can show is that anything that is EF1 and PO, when it exists, must be Leximin optimal. And then from what we just discussed, it must be MMS and PO, right? And this entire idea helps us say that, okay, if I can just find a Leximin optimal solution, it would be MMS, it would be PO, and it would help us identify if an EF1 and PO allocation would exist using this property of the cost differences being whether they're less than equal to 1 or not, right? So if I can find a Leximin optimal allocation, I can actually solve all the different things I'm looking at. And what we do is a little bit of overkill. We solve an even we find an even bigger set of PO allocations, which is called the Pareto frontier. So what is a Pareto frontier? It is a minimal set of allocations that will cover all possible cost distributions that any PO allocation can have for your instance, right? This will include, so basically you will always find one leximal optimal solution, you would always find one socially optimal solution, and many more in between. And we are able to find this using an exponential time algorithm. And here, n is the number of agents, m is the number of orders or nodes other than the hub, right? So what you will notice is that n is the exponential factor here. So if the number of agents is constant, this is actually polynomial time. And the algorithm uses a dynamic program at each node bottom up. And from this, if you can find all the Pareto optimals, you can find the Leximan optimal. From that, you can find MMS. And then, like I said, check for all different combinations. So what do we do with this algorithm? We run experiments. So one thing we checked was, okay, for graphs with 10 orders, 20 orders, 30 orders, which are randomly generated, what is the likelihood of an EF1 and PO allocation existing with 2 agents, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. Okay, these are randomly generated graphs. We use proof of trees here. We have similar heat maps for EF1 and SO, MMS and SO as well. The other thing we did was actually plot these Pareto frontiers. So what this Pareto frontier is really useful for is, you might be thinking, okay, if I'm trying to be fair, maybe I can't be super efficient. The total sum of the total cost might get very high. But if I were to relax fairness, so allow agents to have more differences in cost, can I get efficient very quickly? And the answer is usually no. So what we have done here, for graphs of size 10,000, we've sort of plotted the Pareto frontiers. So here is the difference in cost, or rather the degree of unfairness almost. And here we have the sum of the costs. So these are the total costs that agents are incurring. This size 400 is just one person doing everything, is one solution. And this, the things close to 0 will be the Leximan optimal, right? So as we allow for some unfairness to sink in, the total cost, usually this is the average, the red line is the average behavior, is not decreasing very fast, right? So yeah, we have a bunch of other experiments also. The paper is on my website and on arXiv, and they're also in my thesis. So if you're interested, you guys can look it up. And just to recap, we have looked at the existence and computation of these different combinations of fairness and efficiency. And given one algorithm, this is an XP algorithm, which finds all these combinations of fairness and efficiency and use that to do a bunch of experiments, right? Okay. So the next technical chapter is again for one-sided preferences. And this is joint work with Professor Karagyanis at Aarhus University. And this is titled Repeatedly Matching Items to Agents Fairly and Efficiently. So, okay, why do I specifically need to look at repeated matchings, right? There's a lot of really excellent work on fair division, but most of it does not look at settings where values of agents for the items they can get can change. And when they do, they look at like, okay, the time is the factor that depends, that calls for the value, which is a valid model, but it is not able to capture all the nuance like I mentioned. So one example of why that would be is your first cup of coffee in the morning will do a lot more to wake you up than your 5th cup of coffee, right? Another example would be in research. So suppose there's 2 research groups and they can either do some experiments in the lab or run simulations, okay? So their values will of the research output they are able to get by their time in the lab will depend on how much time they've already spent on the lab, right? So let's say the green group has some really high yield problem. So the more time they spend in the lab, they'll first do all their more significant experiments, then do less. So it will be higher and then slowly taper down. And the same thing with their simulations, right? So the orange group, their value for being in the lab would be similar, but they don't have a lot of experience with running simulations. So initially, their output would be very low. They'll probably just do some small cases to see if things are working correctly. But with time, they'll be able to run better and better. So these fees is how often I've had this in the past. And so this would keep increasing with time, right? So our goal in these settings would be to look at these things where for a fixed set of rounds, the same set of agents have to be matched to the same set of items and be fair and efficient, and while considering values that depend on how often this agent has received something in the past. Okay, so this is what we call a repeated matching. So we'll assume that you have n items and n agents, and they have to be matched over capital T rounds. And to be able to express these values, we will look at the value that an agent has for the Tth copy of that item. So the first copy will be the first time this agent is receiving. This value is not dependent on, okay, I am going to this lab for the first time on a Monday versus a Thursday. It's just, I'm going to this lab for the first time, on the second time, on the fifth time, right? So we want a repeated matching that for each agent and each round will specify a 1-1 matching. So each agent gets exactly one item and all the items are allocated, right? So if I look at it from the space of overall T rounds, I can either look at it from, okay, these are so agent 1 is getting this item K times, the other items L times, or I can look at it, okay, this was the 1-1 matching for the first round, then for the second round, then for the capital Th round. What we find is that if you give me one way of looking at it, I can come up with something that does the other, right? So if you just give me valid agent bundles, I can come up with with multiple different agent matchings that will satisfy this. So we will be focusing on fairness across time, not in every round. So we will focus only on these sort of agent bundles idea, and we will look at each agent's bundle, which will be a multi-set of size T. Okay, and so how will we define the value? We will look, okay, in this set, my value for this set will depend on how often I'm getting each item and just basically summing up the values for those copies. Okay, and again, our efficiency is via the lens of social welfare. So the sum of all the values. And as we have seen just now, this need not be fair. So let's go back to our old example. So here, suppose, I was coming up with a schedule for 1 month. So say 23 working days. What will happen, the social welfare maximizing matching here would match the green group to this lab for all those days, and the orange group gets to run simulations for those days. But now there's a problem. The orange group, if it's only going to work for 1 month, it would rather get time in the lab and finish off important experiments rather than start this whole new chapter of learning to run simulations. So the orange group envies the green group, right? So we need to look at fairness separately from social welfare. And again, we will look for envy-free and in particular relaxations of envy-freeness. So the relaxations we consider, one is EFX. So I'm defining this with goods in mind, that if my value for my bundle should be less than equal to my value for any other agent's bundle with any copy of any of the items they received, one last copy of any of the items they received removed from it. Okay. What we see is that these do not exist for identical valuations, even for values that are not changing across the rounds, which is surprising because some of the most standard ideas that we have, proofs that we have for EFX existing is for identical valuations. Then we also have EF1, which we had just discussed for the earlier thing. And now here we want to not remove maybe any goods removal might not lead to mitigation of envy, but there must exist one item in the other person's bundle, which if I remove the envy is mitigated. This we find does not exist even for identical valuations, but now we have mixed items. So items can be good or bad. I can get positive or negative values, right? So to combat all this, we propose this notion called swap EF. Here, we say that either you're already satisfying envy freeness, or there must exist some items in the two agents bundles, which if you were to swap, this envy gets mitigated. Okay, now what we find is that this does exist for settings that EF1 does not. So that is the value of this thing. And we find that EF1 and swap EF do not actually imply each other. This is just side note. So yeah, our contributions are, we look at efficiency and fairness separately and together. We find that over the space of all valuations, if you want to maximize social welfare, this is NP hard. Okay. But if you restrict yourself to monotone valuations, so values can increase with time or decrease. In either of those cases, this problem is tractable, and in particular, it is tractable for when the valuations don't change with time, right? When these values don't change with time, EF1 is guaranteed to exist for goods. And so you might think, okay, can I maximize to get something that's fair and efficient? Let me find the social welfare maximizing EF1 matching. Not only is this intractable, it is hard to approximate even to a polynomial factor. In addition, we show all the non-existence I just discussed. We propose swap EF and give algorithms which, one, for identical valuations, will always satisfy swap EF, and when all the items are either goods or bads, also satisfy EF1. For more general, we give allocations which satisfy EF1 for certain values of t with respect to n, and for swap EF, I don't know if I'll have the time to see why, but yeah. So let's first look at constant valuations and see what's going on here. Okay, so here EFX repeated matchings need not exist. Super simple example, two agents, two items, 3 rounds. So the first item, G1, gives value 7 to both the agents in all the rounds, and G2 gives a value of 1, right? So even if I get G2 3 times and the other person gets G1 just once, my value can never be greater for my bundle than the other person's bundle, right? And it's impossible to give G1 to both agents equally. So whosoever gets G1 less will envy the other agent, irrespective of which item you remove from their this thing. Okay. So EFX need not exist, but EF1 does. So we can use an algorithm that was studying a different model, but it works here for those who are familiar with EF1. What this does is it runs round robin, but in each round you do a topological search of the ND graph. So EF1 is easy to find here, and we can basically show that if you want to maximize social welfare over EF1 repeated matchings, that is APX hard. And if you just want to maximize social welfare over constant valuations, that's easy. For monotone also, it's easy. We show that it's NT hard in thesis. What we're showing is NT hard when the number of rounds is even 3. So yeah. So in the interest of time, I will quickly do the next slide. So, okay, with identical valuations, so all the agents have the same valuation function. EF1 repeated matchings must exist for goods. We will show this. But for mixed items, say there's one good and one chore, right? And there's even just one round, it's impossible to get something that's EF1. Whosoever gets the chore will always envy the other person. If you remove the good from the other person's bundle, their value is 0. So -1 is less than 0. And if you were to remove this chore, this person gets 0, which is less than 1. So it's impossible to get EF1 here. And so we have proposed swap EF, which does exist for mixed items and identical valuations. And we use this idea of a uniform matching. So if the number of rounds was a multiple of the number of agents, I could just give each agent, each item k times and be NV free, because everyone basically gets the same thing. And so what we do is we do that and then do an additional round of round robin. And now in the interest of time, I will skip this algorithm. So this algorithm, I just want to say, will also work when agents not necessarily have the same values, but have the same rankings over the items. So yeah, just we looked at different fairness and efficiency trade-offs and give some extra algorithms. So, yeah. So I'll quickly go over the other two chapters. I'm not going into details here. So the next chapter is the two-sided preferences. And this is joint work with Arpita, who is an alumnus of the game theory lab. And yes, so here we are now motivated by a setting very familiar to everyone in this room, which is college admissions. So you are all very aware of how engineering admissions work in India. Students get all India ranks, colleges, almost everyone will agree that, okay, IIT is better than, say, Shiv Nadar University. I can say that. I am from Shiv Nadar. So, but yes, so, and these rankings sort of also show up when people apply for colleges, right? So higher all India rank scores tend to go for certain colleges versus others. And what will happen is, new colleges are ranked low despite being competitive. So there might be some great visionary who's starting a new college, gets all the best faculty from IITs, IISc, wherever, and gets great infrastructure and is just as well equipped to give the students a good education as any of the older colleges, but they just are not considered as good. So many seats will go vacant here. Is this fair? Probably not, right? But I also cannot just force, say, All India rank 1 to 300 for the IIT JEE Advanced to attend Shiv Nadar University. That is not fair to those students or the other places that these people would want to go. So what we want to do is be fair to the students, to the colleges in our matching. So in our matching, we want to match N students to N colleges. And we assume we have, again, numerical values for these settings. So again, quick example, you have pink student, blue student, green college, and orange college. So you say, okay, Shivika, last time you were talking about similar values. Let's give both the students a value of 20 and match pink student to green college and blue student to orange college, right? There's a problem here. The green college prefers the blue student to the pink student. And the blue student also prefers this green college to the orange college, right? So there's nothing stopping this green college from kicking out the pink student and then bringing in the blue student in its place, right? This is called a blocking pair. So a student college pair are blocking if the student prefers the college over whatever she is matched to. And for the college, there is some student it would like to kick out to bring in this new student. This is called a blocking pair. So we will look for stable matchings where there are no blocking pairs. Okay. And what we will try to do is over stable matchings, find Leximin optimal again. I argue why Leximin optimal makes the most sense here in the paper. You can look it up if you're interested. But again, we want to because these are non-negative values, now we want to maximize the minimum value attained and then the second minimum and so on. And the point is you want to minimize the discrepancy in the values. So we, over the space of stable matchings, we will find the Leximan optimal. Unsurprisingly, this is also NP-hard. So we then come up with some assumptions that help make this problem be solved in F polynomial time. One is called isometric valuations. Here, the student's value for the college is the same as the college's value for that student. This is not super critical, but it does help. Then the next is called master list or global rankings or same order preferences. So the students have the same ranking over the colleges. Their exact values might change, but everyone would think IISc is better than Shivnadar, right? And similarly, the colleges have the same rankings over the students, say based on the all India ranks, right? And this is a very critical thing to make this assumption that you need to make this problem tractable. And so is strict preferences. So all these values, there should be no ties. So I clearly prefer, say, IISc to Shivnadar versus someone being like, okay, they're equally good. So what we find here is that if you have ranked isometric valuations and strict preferences, you can solve this problem in linear time, basically. But if you don't have strict preferences, this problem becomes strongly NP-hard, which you don't know what it means, just ignore these strongly. Ranked valuations alone, without isometric, this thing with strict preferences, the problem is still tractable. But if you relax strict preferences to weak preferences, you not only cannot get approximations, you cannot get any polynomial approximation. And so now at this point, you might be thinking, is strict preferences doing the heavy lifting? Yes, but without rank valuations, you still cannot do it because just not ranked strict preferences, the problem is still NP-hard. This APX hard is just inherited here. What we give, interestingly, is that when there are just two colleges, right, and you have strict preferences, you can have an efficient algorithm, polynomial time algorithm. But for weak preferences, this is still hard. So yeah, so these are the results of this paper and chapter. Finally, we look at fractional matching. So far we have been looking that, okay, in this round or in this thing, this agent and this item or these two agents are always matched. Now we allow things to be matched fractionally to any sort of this thing. You can be matched for a weight of 1 by square root 2 also. And here we are commenting on the existence of matching mechanisms that return stable matchings and are incentive compatible. So fractional matchings, again, not very well studied, but they're very natural for a lot of standard real life settings. And what we do is, instead of just focusing on integral matchings, we expand our space to things that are fractional. And now we are looking for stable matching mechanisms that are incentive compatible. So there's about 40-year-old result which shows that this intersection is NP-hard, is empty. Not NP-hard, it's just empty, it need not exist. So what we show is that the fractional part also is empty. And not only that, if you were to even relax stability to approximate stability, even then you cannot have an incentive compatible mechanism. What we do have is that suppose you had an instance which has a unique stable fractional matching. It has to be integral, that has been shown. That there actually all possible stable matching mechanisms would be incentive compatible. And we identify the CMFP property, which will then help you identify these stable matchings. So yes, that is the contribution of this chapter. I'm again not going into details. And overall, we looked at the different intersections of fairness and efficiency in different matching models. And there is a lot of scope actually for future work. I just want to point out one thing. So for repeated matchings, point number 2, where we are maximizing social welfare for 2 rounds, this has been listed as an open problem in the thesis, but since then we have actually solved, and this is also NP hard. So yeah, just a side note. And if any of you are interested in any of these problems, feel free to ask me. And I'd also like to thank all the people on the screen for being just great people to work with and talk to over the last 5 years. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions. Questions from this side first. Questions from Professor Gopinath. So questions from this side. So now I'm going to randomly pick one of you and ask you to ask some questions. Any questions?
Sorry, sir?
Did you apply any of these things to any industrial problems, or political problems, or economic problems?
So, so the first one is, as you have seen, so the first 2 things that I talked about are more initial things. I think, at least for the repeated matchings portion, if we can get, I think directly we can apply it to places like IISc where you have to schedule lab resources if people are interested in being fair. But otherwise, delivery problem is, I think, very useful and aimed at very real world problems of which are happening.
But one of the problems the industry has is sourcing. In other words, where do I get the suppliers from?
Yes,
that is one of the problems that there might be game theory and all that.
Yes, sir.
So here you're matching it. How do I match a manufacturer who is in China to somebody who is in India?
Yes, sir. So that would be interesting. We have not looked at those things here, but that would be interesting, yes.
I think matching problems exist everywhere, and I think each of the chapters can be applied in many, many industrial contexts, right?
Yes, sir. The college admissions thing, I think we can actually look at simulating it on JEE data also. But I think there is actually, so not our work, but there's some work out of IIT Kanpur that shows that if you were to switch from what were the old IIT admissions to more of a deferred acceptance thing, then the number of vacant seats actually reduces. So there is a lot of scope for looking at it in the real world also.
So some of you who are new to matching problems, I would very much advise you to read up the paper by Gale and Shafi. It's a 1962 paper in American Mathematical Monthly. It's a classic paper. And if you want a digest of that paper, you can also look at chapter number 30 in my textbook on game theory and mechanism design. Some advertisement for my book. So thank you very much for attending this thesis defense, and all of us will again wish very well for Shivika, and then we will congratulate her. Thank you, Shivika. Thank you very much.
Sir, I'll stop the recording.